Hey, what's up, everybody? So I have a very special treat for you. You might not think that this applies to a lot of you, but it's going to give you an education regardless. You may or may not know that I run a podcast called Warrior Soul Podcast, and I have a new podcast co-host, and his name is Andrew Marr. Andrew was a Special Forces Green Beret. He was an operator. And he served in Afghanistan. He served as a breacher, which means he worked with explosives daily. And he suffered numerous impacts to his skull, not from like one traumatic explosion, but day after day of being exposed to explosions led to inflammation in his brain, from his brain shaking around in his skull. And this led to inflammation, which increased something called neurosteroids. Now, a lot of us think of hormones as being produced exclusively in the testicles and other glands, but your brain actually produces a good amount of testosterone. And so Andrew, when he got back, he came back with all his limbs, all his fingers, 100% healthy, but soon he began suffering. He began suffering from depression. He began suffering from, weird kind of outbursts. And he got to a point where he couldn't really walk in a straight line. And this was due to hormonal deficiencies. Now, a lot of us here on this channel were concerned with a whole bunch of different health and fitness matters. A lot of the people watching this channel are men. And this will give you a good idea of how important hormones are. If you do suffer from a traumatic brain injury, this will also give you a good idea that this isn't a life sentence. There are treatments out there that are available to you. What Andrew was trying to do through the Warrior Angels Foundation, and one of the reasons why I brought him on is in helping veterans to get the same type of treatment he did, which involved replenishing a lot of those neurosteroids through a therapy developed by Dr. Mark Gordon. So he's going to talk about this. This is a clip from him on the Montel Williams Wellness Show. And it's about 15 minutes long. I hope you enjoy it. Please put your comments below, and we'll see if we can get Andrew on here to answer any questions you guys have. I'll talk to you soon with a new video. I got to be at a conference tomorrow, so no video tomorrow. But we'll get some videos up later on this week. Send me your questions. Talk to you soon.
Migraine headaches that led to blurry vision, that led to double vision, led to all kinds of balance issues, and then it became emotionally liable. So I started having
because it was a softball being shoved into the back of my skull. Here's a morphine patch, or here's Vicodin, or here's some Percocet. We have no idea, but we don't know what's going on.
This is the biggest cause of loss of productive years of life in this country. The people that have the accidents, that have the disabilities.
Like, I was very dizzy. I was pretty out of it. Like, out of one eye, it was pretty blurry. But it was one of our playoff games for like a state cup that we had for my club team. So
I think you want to get to a point where you can almost eliminate this from happening. And it's either going to come through science or it's going to come through technology.
Welcome to a very special edition of Living Well with Montel. What if I told you that everyone, including yourself, is at risk for a traumatic brain injury, also known as TBI? Well, today, I'm going to take you on a journey to understand injuries of the brain, what a concussion is, what a TBI means, what CTE means. But first, I want you to take a look at this.
My name is Andrew Marr, and I'm a former Special Forces Green Beret. My specialty was explosives, demolitions, and so that had me in and around countless explosions through the entirety of my career. What that resulted in was a medical retirement from what we now know were multiple traumatic brain injuries. The current military medical model for dealing with traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress is predicated on medication and psychotherapy. This did nothing to improve my life. I've talked to hundreds of veterans. I haven't found anybody that's been a good solution. And it doesn't work because it doesn't treat the underlying condition. It serves to mask symptoms, which in most cases further exacerbates the problem. The purpose of the Warrior Angels Foundation is to pinpoint and treat the underlying condition for service members and veterans who have incurred a traumatic brain injury in the line of duty. And since January of 2015, we've successfully helped over 100 veterans come back to life.
Please welcome Special Forces veteran Andrew Marr to the show. Thanks so much.
Montel, it's a pleasure.
Buddy, it's really kind of crazy because, you know, as we look at and talk about traumatic brain injury, concussive brain injury, and we mostly in America think about this as it relates to soldiers.
Right.
But what's so crazy, and part of the reason why I'm so glad you're here, is because there are so many soldiers who are like yourself, who even though the blast happened, the accident happened, you never thought you had a traumatic brain injury, did you?
Correct. Yeah, the correlation just wasn't there.
Business as usual. Your job was set up, and again, what we're now finding out is that even concussive wave of the blast passing through your skull is pretty much me smacking you upside the side of your head.
Yeah, exactly. What we know is called the coup, counter coup. So coup, the front of the brain hits the skull right here, counter coup, push back. And that happens from the explosive blast wave that's propagated from the explosion. And we now know that goes and fills up every airfield organ, including the brain, and smacks it around. And by definition, every one of those is a traumatic brain injury.
You had hundreds. 2009 to 2014, you're deployed. You remember having really only one incident when you were knocked out?
I only knocked unconscious one time, Montel.
And when was that? That was like 2014?
Yeah, that was my last deployment in 2013.
You got out, right? Got out. Now you telling war stories.
Yeah, I was smoking, joking, laughing. I have all my limbs, so there's just nothing to, like I said, there was no correlation at that time between head trauma and the symptoms that come from traumatic brain injury.
And this is why we need to pay so much attention, because you're home, you think you're normal. It's a year later, and what symptoms did you feel coming on?
Well, I think it's important to talk about the very first thing, Montel, was libido issues. And again, that's important because I was married, I had 4 kids, and my wife thinks, okay, all of a sudden, well, you don't love me or there's somebody else. And that couldn't have been further from the truth, and I understand now where she was coming from. But that's the first thing that happened. And I was 32 years old at the time, adult, you know, alpha male, and that just wasn't something that happened. So I can understand why she would think that as well. So that was the first thing that happened.
See, I can understand why so many young men, 32 years old, wouldn't even admit it and go on suffering silently, causing more issues in the home, turning it around, spinning it, lashing out, all those things. So you recognize that one?
Yeah, that's where it started. And then it started with migraine headaches that led to blurry vision, that led to double vision, led to all kinds of balance issues. And then it became emotionally liable. So I started having panic attacks, anxiety attacks. I'd have them in public. And again, this is something that is completely foreign to me. I thought this was a weak-minded individual's issue, not somebody like myself, you know what I mean? And
then you realize, that's a kind of a thought process that goes through my mind sometimes. As I talk to people who have traumatic brain injury, you know, I have an MS brain. An MS brain with multiple scars throughout the brain is something, in a way, kind of similar, not the same, but kind of similar to a concussive blast brain.
Very similar.
I got all these scars going on there. Well, I didn't find out until late in life that the predominance of scars that I have from my MS are in an area of the brain that's called the pons, which controls emotional lability.
Absolutely.
So just like yourself, I was going through this period of time, walking around, yelling, screaming, also crying all the time.
Yep.
Without any control.
Yeah, no control over it. And you know, for a man especially, not even a special forces soldier, you can think how difficult that is to say, hey, I'm crying and I have no reason, I don't know why I'm crying and I can't control it. You know, I thought I was going crazy.
But you also had the wherewithal to say, I need help. So you reached out, and so many of our other guys don't do it, my friend. So I'm thanking you for doing that. We're putting up the website for your organization so people know where to reach. But when you started reaching out for help, what were some of the things that you started doing to see if you can at least get a little bit more control?
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, Montel, is you sit on it until you can't sit on it anymore. You know what I mean? And so when I started having these anxiety, attacks in public, at home, you know, crying in front of my family, behaving in ways that I did not want to be behaving. I saw that the detriment that was happening and creating to my wife and to my children. And I just wanted to be myself again. And so that why it was easy for me to raise my hand, because I had already solidified my place at the table, you know, earning that those marks in combat. So nobody could have, you know, said, hey, well, we just think you can't hack it anymore. You know what I mean? And so I was like, hey, I'm having problems. All this stuff is never there before. I think it might have something to do with all these blasts that we've been in and around for our career. And whatever we can do to help it, please help me. And what I got was a multitude of medication and psychotherapy that at the end of the day made my life tremendously worse than when we started.
You know, TBI has been called the silent killer of both the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And there's a reason why, because there's a silent degradation happening inside of that skull, of our brains, and a lot of times soldiers aren't even aware that that's going on, and all they can see are the symptoms they see from within. So they blame themselves. And let's please welcome the former director of the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, Colonel Sidney Hinds. Welcome, Colonel. This is why your office exists in some ways, right? To help us all try to figure out all of the different symptoms and damage can be done from traumatic brain injury.
Absolutely. I recently left the Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center, which is the Department of Defense's point of contact for traumatic brain injury. And they take care of traumatic brain injury in a way that's very unique. They partner with the services, they partner with the different providers, and they have a triad of education, clinical care, and research, because they're all interrelated. And in many cases, getting that education out, once you've created a process or you have a new product, is really the speed bump, right? The rate limiting step. If people don't know about it, if people aren't using it, it's not getting out there, and providers aren't able to bring to bear all the things that the research and clinical community know to take care of patients.
But like right now, I think in the country today, and I may be wrong, but as much as we've talked about it, as much as you hear it, there must be another 10,000 Andrews out there right now where, because we also know traumatic brain injury doesn't have to start a year later. Symptoms can start 3, 4, 5 years later. They can be this very, very slow burning, you know, ember, and next thing you know, turn into a full-blown flame 5 years later. So we're still waiting for a couple guys, in a sense, to mature in that sense. I mean, you look at yourself, the first line of defense, I'm sure, was medication, right? Right. So, and like, I am not by anybody's stretch of the imagination knocking medication. For those who need it, it could be the only way that they can survive. But I have to back up and say, I know this for a fact. There's not one medication approved by the FDA that was meant psychotropically to work for a person for the rest of their life. They were made and designated to be administered for periods of time. When we get into areas where a person's TBI causes them to have to be medicated for 2, 3 years, we got to be looking for something else. Because I think the side effects from the medication could be just as bad. That's me talking, that's not anybody else talking but Montel.
Well, the research will support that as well, Montel, but I think what you're talking about is we need something other than just masking symptoms or symptom management. We need to get to the underlying condition. Can we objectively identify the underlying condition, and then can we treat it? I think that's the real question. Talk a little bit about the program that you have reached into and is giving you some help right now. Well, what we have to look about is TBI is a two-phase injury, like you talked about. Phase 1 is explosive blast wave, blunt force trauma, acceleration, deacceleration, and what that does is that opens up neuroinflammation, which is going to lead a cascade of inflammatory chemicals that come out, okay? And that's where the inflammation process starts. And if we, and that's the silent part of it, because that can continue on a year, multiple years after the injury, right? So that's the silent part, this neuroinflammation, and that's going to kill off cells in the brain. So when that happens over time, you start seeing this dysregulation of the person's overall well-being. couple that with disruption to the hormonal system, both the hormones that are produced and synthesized in the brain as well as the peripheral glands, now you're going to have all the cascades of the problems that people see from traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. So what our program does, where Angels Foundation is, identifies that through a laboratory test, and then we get rid of inflammation and we treat the hormonal dysregulation by bringing them back to natural physiological level.
But a lot of times soldiers aren't even reaching out for that help. How do we convince more and more to, number one, take a look in the mirror? You know, I find it's like guys like Andrew, you know, Special Forces guys who are Navy SEALs, guys who are, you know, Green Beret. These are the toughest guys to tell them to look at yourself.
I think the answer to Montel, we need leaders from in the veteran community and in the service, guys who've been there, guys that the people will look up to, at least listen to, speak out. Hey, this is what can happen. This is what happened to me. Here's my background. Here's how this was dealt with. And here's the trials and tribulations. Here's the answers. And so the right people speaking up and saying that will be heard, because that's the kind of people that will get listened to. I don't know. How do you see it, Colonel?
Well, I agree. It's not going to be just one individual, one organization who will conquer what's currently going on. It starts with awareness and leadership involvement. And this is a type of disorder that you can't just trust the patient to come in and complain. There are many cases where, you know, a patient will say, I'm fine, but when they get evaluated, you notice the balance problem.
Right.
You notice eye movement problems, and then as you track them, maybe then the headache develops. And so,
and then, you know, and even some of the guys, when we talk to someone, they will not admit the fact that this maelstrom going on inside of that head can cause suicidal thoughts. And that's the one that I'm the most afraid of, because I mean, I battle this, I scream about this at the top of my lungs. We got 22 soldiers a day committing suicide, and it's not all because these guys are drug addicts. There are a myriad of reasons,
right.
And we cannot dismiss the fact that some of this could be from the ticking time bomb of TBI.
Yeah, I agree. I remember when we first started having suicide problems in the Special Forces community. The first one that happened was just baffling to us. We were like, how could that individual be so weak?
Because you knew the guy.
Right. And I was like, how could he do that? And it was just kind of ignorance on my part, on our part as a whole. But when we started having a 4, 5, 6 in a short amount of time, all experienced warfighters, guys who made a career out of making difficult decisions in difficult situations, and they thought the best decision was to take their own life. That's the first time I thought, man, there's something more to it than what's going on, what's meeting the eye. And then it wasn't until my own battles with it where, you know, I became an alcoholic. I woke up one day, I was on 13 medications. My wife was pregnant with our 5th child, 9 months pregnant. Her request of me for the day was, baby, can you keep your drinking down in case I go into labor so I don't have to drive myself to the hospital? Wow. And I started to think, maybe my family would be better if I just wasn't here, because I saw the pain in my 8-year-old's eyes when I came to, and I realized I must have just lost it on her. I don't know. And just damaging to a father who would never want to do that on any situation, be it if her behavior, you know, was something out of line or not. I was just like, my God, I'm malfunctioning and it's affecting my family. I think I should just check out. And that's when it clicked. I was like, this is what's happening. This is the cycle. Asking for help, getting put on 13 medications, drinking, no sleep, not getting the help that you think that you need, seeing it affect your family, continue to decline, and then being told this is the new you. So that's the thought process that leads somebody to think, I think it would just be better if I checked out. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to do that. There's answers.
You know, I say this, and I want to make sure people at home understand the way I'm saying this. When we think about TBI, and we think about our soldiers who are affected by it, we only stop the thought process with the ones who ended it all. There are those who are fighting, who are working hard to help others. That's what we should pay a lot of attention to. We'll take a little break. We'll come back. I want to kind of shift over for a second. I can't thank you enough, Andrew, for sharing that.
Thank you, sir.
My brothers out there, our brothers out there in uniform need to know there's no shame in being able to
It's not
explain.
a mental weakness. It is not a mental weakness.
Wow.
All right?
All right. I can't say thank you enough, sir, for being here. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, for sure. Take a break. We'll be back right after this. As you've heard from our guests, traumatic brain injury can cause many symptoms, including balance disorders. The only way we're going to be able to learn if treatments work to address these symptoms is through scientific clinical trial. If you, a family member, or a friend have chronic balance disorder that is a result of a mild or moderate traumatic brain injury due to sports, military service, slips, trips, or falls, they may be eligible to participate in a clinical trial for an investigational device being developed to treat balance disorder. Please visit braininjurytrial.com/livingwell or call 1-877-847-4290 for more information.